Tian Xiwei had become an expert at pretending. For years she smiled at the right moments. She laughed when everyone expected laughter. She celebrated victories with the people around her. She attended events. She walked red carpets. She accepted awards. She posed for photographs. And through all of it, she carried a secret so carefully protected that not even her closest friends fully understood its weight. The secret was simple. She had fallen in love with Zhang Linghe long before anyone imagined there could be a story between them. The problem was not the feeling itself. The problem was timing. Timing had always been her enemy. Every opportunity arrived a little too late. Every moment that seemed perfect somehow slipped away before she could reach it. Every chance to speak became another reason to remain silent. At first, she convinced herself the feeling would disappear. That was what everyone said. Give it time. Focus on work. Stay busy. Move forward. The feeling will fade. But the feeling never faded. Instead, it grew stronger. It became part of her routine, part of her mornings, part of her evenings, part of the quiet moments nobody else could see. Every interview where his name appeared, every event where their paths crossed, every conversation that lasted longer than expected, every smile that lingered in her memory long after everyone else had forgotten it. Years passed. Nothing changed. Or, at least that was what she believed. Then came Tokyo. Nobody realized how important another week filled with appearances and promotional activities. Nothing unusual. Nothing memorable. At least that was how it appeared from the outside. But sometimes the most important chapters begin disguised as ordinary days. Tokyo greeted them with bright lights and endless motion. The city never seemed to rest. People moved with purpose. Trains arrived with perfect precision. Neon signs painted entire streets with color. The air felt alive. Yet beneath all that movement, something unexpected began happening. For the first time in years, Tian Xiwei noticed something different about Zhang Linghe. He seemed distracted, not unhappy, not frustrated, just thoughtful, as if something occupied his mind. Several times, she caught him staring into the distance. Several times, she noticed him becoming unusually quiet during conversations. Several times, she wanted to ask what was wrong. Each time, she stopped herself, because asking questions was dangerous. Questions led to conversations. Conversations led to honesty. Honesty was the one thing she feared most. The week continued. Schedules became busier. Events became longer. Photographers followed them everywhere. Everything moved so quickly that nobody had time to think. Until the rain arrived. Tokyo transformed when it rained. The city lights reflected across wet streets. Buildings shimmered beneath silver clouds. The atmosphere became softer, almost cinematic. That evening, a large industry gathering took place inside one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Hundreds attended. Actors, directors, investors, producers. Everyone important seemed present. Tian Xiwei arrived expecting another routine evening. Instead, she walked directly into the moment that would change everything. Across the room stood Zhang Linghe. Nothing unusual there. What surprised her was who stood beside him. A woman she had never seen before. They were laughing, talking, completely absorbed in conversation. For a moment, Tian Xiwei froze. Not because of jealousy, not because of anger, because of fear. A fear she had avoided confronting for years. The fear that someday someone else would arrive first. Someone braver, someone more confident, someone willing to say the things she never found the courage to say. For the first time, she realized silence had consequences. The evenings suddenly felt longer. The room felt louder. The distance between them felt impossible. She tried focusing on conversations around her. Nothing worked. Hours passed. The gathering continued. Then something happened she never expected. The mysterious woman eventually left. Moments later, Zhang Linghe began searching the room. Not casually, not briefly, deliberately, as though looking for someone specific. Again and again his eyes moved through the crowd. Again and again he appeared disappointed, until finally their eyes met. Everything stopped. The noise disappeared.
The crowd vanished.
The evening narrowed into a single moment. And for reasons she could not explain, she looked away first. Later that night, she found herself standing alone on a quiet terrace overlooking the city. The rain had stopped. Tokyo stretched endlessly beneath the night sky. The view was breathtaking, yet she barely noticed it. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not need to turn around. She already knew who it was. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt enormous. Then Zhang Linghe surprised her. He asked why she had been avoiding him all evening. The question caught her completely off guard, because she had assumed he never noticed. She had spent years believing he never noticed, yet somehow he always had. The conversation that followed lasted longer than either expected. Longer than the city lights. Longer than the schedules waiting for them. Longer than the walls she had spent years building around herself. For the first time she spoke honestly. Not carefully. Not strategically. Honestly. She spoke about missed opportunities. About hesitation. About fear. About all the things she had never said. And when she finally finished, something remarkable happened. Zhang Linghe smiled. Not the smile cameras captured. Not the smile audiences knew. A different smile. A real one. Then he admitted something that changed her world completely. For years he had been waiting too. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for courage. Waiting for her. The city continued moving around them. Cars crossed distant bridges. Lights illuminated skyscrapers. People hurried through stations. Yet on that terrace time seemed to pause. Neither could change the years behind them. Neither could recover lost opportunities. Neither could rewrite the silence that had lasted so long. But they could decide what happened next. And for the first time, neither chose fear. When dawn finally arrived, Tokyo looked different. Perhaps the city had not changed at all. Perhaps they had. Sometimes life is not transformed by dramatic scandals. Sometimes it changes because two people finally stop running from the truth. For Tian Xiwei, the most important night of her life was not an award ceremony, not a career milestone, not a red carpet. It was a quiet conversation beneath a Tokyo sky where years of uncertainty finally came to an end. And as the first sunlight touched the horizon, she realized something she would never forget. The hardest words are not the ones we say. The hardest words are the ones we spend years refusing to say. And sometimes all it takes is one night to change everything. The conversation should have ended there. That was what both of them expected. A few honest words. A little relief. Then back to reality. Back to schedules. Back to appearances. Back to lives that moved too quickly to stop for something as uncertain as feelings. But neither of them walked away. The city continued shining beneath them. Cars moved like streams of light through distant streets. The wind carried faint sounds from somewhere far below. Yet neither seemed interested in leaving. For years they had lived with unfinished thoughts. For years they had allowed timing to make decisions for them. Now that the silence had finally broken, neither wanted to return to it. Zhang Linghe leaned against the terrace railing and looked out across the city. Then he laughed quietly. The sound surprised Tian Xiwei. Not because it was loud. Because it sounded relieved. As though a burden he had carried for years had finally disappeared. She asked him why he was laughing.
He shook his head.
Then he told her something she never expected. He said the funniest part of the entire situation was that he had almost given up. Not once. Not twice. Many times. There were moments when he convinced himself she would never see him the way he saw her. Moments when he believed he had imagined every meaningful glance. Every lingering conversation. Every moment that felt different. Every small sign he thought he noticed. Listening to him felt unreal. Because she had spent years thinking exactly the same thing. For the first time they began comparing memories. The forgotten moments that had remained trapped inside their minds. A conversation from years ago. A photograph neither deleted. A message drafted but never sent. A compliment remembered far longer than it should have been. The more they talked, the more astonishing the truth became. Their stories were almost identical. Two people moving in circles around the same feelings. Both waiting. Both hoping. Both afraid. neither willing to take the first step. Hours passed. Neither noticed. Eventually, the city grew quieter. The crowds below became smaller. The night slowly approached its end. That was when Zhang Linghe reached into his jacket pocket. Tian Xiwei watched curiously. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. The edges looked worn, as though it had been carried around for a very long time. He handed it to her. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. Her eyes widened immediately. It was her handwriting. Years earlier, during a caste gathering, she had written several encouraging notes for everyone involved in a project. Most people threw them away afterward. She assumed Zhang Linghe had done the same. Instead, he had kept his. All these years. The realization left her speechless. The note itself was simple. A few encouraging words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing romantic. Yet somehow it had survived years of travel. Years of work. Years of change. She looked up at him. He smiled. Then admitted he carried it whenever he felt uncertain about something important. At that moment, Tian Xiwei realized something. People rarely protect things that mean nothing. The note had never been important because of the words. It had been important because of who wrote them. The sky above Tokyo slowly began changing color. Darkness started giving way to the first hints of morning. Neither wanted the night to end, because ending the night meant facing reality. And reality came with questions, schedules, responsibilities, expectations, the outside world. Yet something inside both of them had already changed. The uncertainty was gone. The waiting was over. For years they had lived inside possibilities. Now they finally stood inside certainty. Several days later they returned home. Nothing appeared different from the outside. The public saw the same familiar faces, the same events, the same interviews, the same appearances. Yet people slowly began noticing subtle changes. A little more confidence, a little more comfort, a little more happiness. The difference was impossible to explain, yet somehow impossible to miss. Rumors naturally followed. They always did. Speculation spread. Theories appeared. Questions multiplied. Neither rushed to answer them. For once they were not interested in proving anything. Because after spending years hiding from their own feelings, they no longer felt pressure to explain themselves to anyone else. The people closest to them noticed first. Friends commented on how relaxed they seemed. Coworkers mentioned the change in atmosphere whenever they were together. Even strangers seemed capable of sensing it. There was a new energy surrounding them. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just genuine. Months passed. Life continued moving forward. Projects came and went. Success arrived. Challenges appeared. Schedules remained demanding. Yet through all of it something remained constant. The certainty they discovered that night in Tokyo. Whenever difficulties appeared, they remembered that terrace. Whenever doubt surfaced, they remembered the conversation. Whenever life became complicated, they remembered how close they had come to never speaking honestly at all. One evening long afterward, Tian Xiwei found herself looking through old photographs. Images from different years, different cities, different projects, different chapters of life. She stopped on one picture. It had been taken years earlier. She and Zhang Linghe stood several feet apart, both smiling, both pretending everything was normal. Looking at the image now made her laugh, because she finally knew what neither of them understood at the time. The story had already begun. Long before Tokyo. Long before the terrace. Long before the conversation. Long before either found the courage to admit the truth. The story had begun the moment they started seeing each other differently. Everything afterward had simply been the journey toward recognizing it. Years later, people would remember Tokyo as the turning point, the city where everything changed. And perhaps that was true. But the real lesson was much simpler. Life rarely changes because of one dramatic moment. It changes because of countless small moments finally connecting together. A glance, a conversation, a memory, a note kept inside a jacket pocket, a feeling carried quietly for years, and the courage to finally stop pretending it does not exist. As Tian Xiwei looked out the window that evening, she found herself smiling. Not because everything had become perfect, Not because every challenge disappeared, but because she no longer wondered what might have happened. The question that had followed her for years was finally gone. The waiting was over. The silence was over. The uncertainty was over. And it all started on a night in Tokyo when two people finally stopped letting fear decide their future.